Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. A couple weeks ago, I published a video all about my ear stretching journey that kind of documented what inspired me to stretch, pictures throughout my stretching process, how the process went for me, all that good stuff. And a lot of folks in the comments know that I have other stretch piercings and wanted to hear about other stretching journeys that I'd had. I will eventually make one about my septum piercing, but today I want to talk about my tongue stretching journey because I feel like that's not something that you see talked about that often. So yes, for those who are wondering, I did used to have my tongue stretched. You did hear me correct, used to. We'll get into that later in the video, but I'm gonna pop up a picture of it. Here is what it looked like. I stretched it up to a 1/2 inch diameter, so about 12.5 millimeters, and I wore it at that size for, gosh, probably like 6 or 7 years, honestly. But let's start all the way at the beginning. I always really loved tongue piercings. I got my first facial piercing. I got my nose pierced when I was 13 or 14, and I was immediately hooked, and I really wanted a tongue piercing right from the get-go. They were all over online. I'd seen them a bunch of places. I thought they were super cool. So I think I was probably 15 or 16 when I convinced my parents to let me get my tongue pierced. And I went and I got it done, and when I was there getting it done, my piercer at the time was talking to me about her tongue piercing, and she was actually stretching her tongue. Now at the time, she was stretching because her plan was to eventually split her tongue, and there was a belief in that time period that stretching your tongue first would lead to a better tongue split. A word to the wise, we now know that that is not the case. That is not the case. So do not get and stretch a tongue piercing if your plan is to have your tongue split. It does not make things any easier. In fact, it oftentimes makes things more difficult and more challenging for the practitioner, and it can limit your split. So if that's your goal, don't do that. She showed me her tongue. She was probably around a 4 or a 2 gauge at the time, and I was in love. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I started talking with her about it. I started researching the process. I was reading about stuff on BME. There really wasn't a ton of information about tongue stretching. There still isn't, to be honest. It's not a piercing that you see people stretch super often, but I was in love. I thought it was so cool. So fast forward a couple of months, I had my tongue pierced, I healed it. It was it was a standard 14 or 12 gauge tongue piercing, whatever. I knew that I really wanted to stretch it. I've been talking to my piercer about it, and she was like, I'd really love to do a large gauge tongue piercing. And I was getting a bunch of piercings. Basically, I got my nose pierced, and my parents said yes, and the floodgates opened. All I asked for any birthday, holiday, event, anything was piercings. So I told my mom that my tongue ring fell out and I needed to get a new one put in and needed to get it stretched to a larger size so that didn't happen again. And she took me to the studio, and she oftentimes did not like to come in for oral piercing stuff. It squicked her out, and the piercer was doing it for me for no piercing fee, no nothing, just because she really wanted to do a large gauge tongue piercing. So I went in, and my mom thought I was getting my jewelry changed, and I actually had my tongue re-pierced at an 8 gauge. And this is a picture of me when I had it at that size. You can see it doesn't really look too much different from a regular tongue piercing. It was just a slightly thicker metal bar and slightly larger beads. Every now and again, someone would be like, oh, those beads look bigger than normal, and I would explain that my tongue was at an 8 gauge. But that was the start of me stretching, and I got it pierced at an 8 gauge to jumpstart that stretching process and just immediately be at a bigger size where it was going to be easier to stretch. And for me, a really cool part of stretching my tongue, because I was still in high school at this time, I was in sophomore or junior year, a really cool part of stretching my tongue was that it was hidden. My parents didn't know, my classmates didn't know, my friends didn't know. Each time I would go up a size and nobody knew. It was hidden in my mouth. You really couldn't tell. It was perfect. It was something that I could do secretly on the down low. I wasn't even stretching my ears yet, which is crazy to me to think about in hindsight, that I was stretching my tongue years before I was stretching my ears, but I was stretching my tongue years before I was stretching my ears. And it was cool, and it kind of helped me fall in love with the process of stretching my tongue. And there was a part of me that was like, you know, maybe I'll get it split in the future. But as I stretched, I just fell more and more in love with the process, the jewelry, and having a stretched tongue. And I did eventually see this image that has stuck with me for years online. This was, I want to say, published in like a PFIQ or something similar magazine. I saw it online, probably on BME. But it was someone with their stretched tongue, their tongue stuck out with their stretched tongue piercing, and there was a woman's foot in high heels, and the heel was through the stretched tongue piercing. And whew, that image made me feel things. That image made me feel things. I thought that image was so beautiful, was so elegant, and was so like subtly erotic, that I was in love, and I wanted to get my tongue big enough to recreate that image. And fun fact, I never actually did end up recreating that image as much as I really wanted to, for the whole time I had my tongue stretched. And you know, I live life with very few regrets, but I do regret not taking the time to recreate that image. So I started stretching again like 17-ish, junior, senior year, so I guess like around there. And tongue stretching is, it's not a great process. It's not a great process, I'm not gonna lie to you. I talk a lot about how ear stretching is painless, and when it's done correctly, whoo, ear stretching is painless. Ear stretching is easy peasy. Tongue stretching, different beast, different beast. At much larger sizes, like above 8 millimeters, 9 millimeters, it does start to get easier, but those smaller stretches were brutal. Even waiting a long time between stretches, sometimes 4 or 6 months. I still oftentimes had to use tapers to get the next size in. It was very uncomfortable. I was doing this when I was younger and less educated, so I did go straight from 2 to 0. I did skip 1 gauge, and that was no joke. That was no joke. I vividly remember I was in my first apprenticeship at the time. It was a slow day, and the artist there who was my mentor ended up having to leave early, so my boss was like, you can, you know, step out early if you want to, Lynn. And I was like, great, I'm gonna stretch my tongue before I go, that way I can just chill for the rest of the night and I'll be good to go tomorrow. And I started putting that taper through my tongue, and I was like, oh my god, I cannot do this, it hurts too bad. And I had my boss come over and just send it. Just send it. And I was in tears. And I remember getting home and having my stepdad get me a big thing of Rita's cherry water ice, and just sitting there on the couch with my tongue stuck in this container of cherry water ice that was like cooling off the swelling, and just with the most intense, miserable, throbbing pain in my tongue that you could imagine. Made getting my wisdom teeth removed seem like a cakewalk. Don't skip sizes. Don't skip sizes. Learn from my mistakes. That was brutal. I had a big lisp for weeks. I was in a ton of pain for weeks. It was really hard to eat. I wish I had known about a 1 gauge back then, because I would have saved myself a lot of heartache and a lot of trouble. But even stretching your tongue correctly and safely, not skipping sizes, being cautious, it's still not the most comfortable stretching process. I will not tell anyone any lies. It's definitely pretty spicy. So if tongue stretching is something that you're considering, you know, be prepared for that. Understand that that's a facet of it. It's muscles, you know? Your tongue is a muscle, and when you're stretching a tongue piercing, you know, you're stretching a centerline tongue piercing, that's not through muscle, that's through connective tissue in the middle of your tongue, but it's pressing up on that muscle, and that muscle presses back actively. So you are often going to need to use tapers. Stretches are going to be pretty uncomfortable. You'll have a lot of swelling, but you'll look really cool. So I mean, who's the winner, really, honestly? Now, my initial goal size was a 0 gauge, and I got to that size, and I was pretty happy there, not gonna lie, but I struggled a lot with jewelry at the time. Here are some old photos of me during the stretching process. I believe I'm wearing like acrylic in some of these. I was wearing metal for a lot of my earliest stretches, but metal got very heavy very quickly and made speaking really, really difficult. So I switched over to acrylic, which was much more lightweight and worked. However, acrylic had the awful side effect of just like absolutely being a plaque magnet, especially with my tongue stretched as big as it was. Despite brushing 3 times a day, despite taking my jewelry out and using denture cleaner on it, I really could not fight that plaque. And it was embarrassing. My breath smelled bad, you know? I'm just gonna be honest with you. My breath did not smell good while I was wearing acrylic. And metal made it really difficult to talk, so I kind of felt stuck between a rock and a hard place. And this was right around the time that I was learning about better piercing, right? Because if you've seen my apprenticeship story, you know my first apprenticeship was bad. I was not taught correctly. I didn't learn the proper things. So this would be around the time period when I was starting to learn about safe quality jewelry. Oh, my partner's cat has a toy. He is hollering back there. So this is right around the time I was learning about safe quality jewelry, and I was working a lot with Glassware Studios, which is a glass body jewelry company that you all know. I love. This was at my second studio, and we were talking about it, and Ryan was like, I can make tongue plugs. I could make a piece of jewelry for you for that. And I was like, bet? Really? And he made me my first glass tongue plug, and the rest is history. That was the most comfortable, lightweight, easy to keep clean, just phenomenal piece of jewelry I had ever worn in my stretched tongue. And that was when I decided I wanted to go bigger, and that was when I ended up stretching to 1/2 inch from 0 gauge, because just everything about Ryan Kremp doing glass tongue plugs for tongue stretching absolutely revolutionized the process. He did custom, like, smooth domed tops, which made them really, really low profile, so it was, like, virtually impossible for me to hit it on my teeth or gums. He made custom wearable lengths that fit the size of my mouth and my tongue exactly, so there was no extra space, and he came up with these amazing micro flares on the bottom that were super secure but also super comfortable. Being glass meant that it was so easy to clean the plaque right off of it. It was hypoallergenic, it was safe for my mouth. It was amazing. So here are some pictures of me at my goal size. One of these is actually from the Glassware Studio website, sporting one of the super cool lime green glass tongue plugs that Ryan Kremp made for me. I did have a cool collection of different tongue plugs. This sparkly opal one is the one that I wore the most often, but I wore a bunch of different fun ones because they were super comfy and easy to change in and out. Now, I know a lot of people's question is like, well, what does it look like when you take the jewelry out of it? So here's a picture of me without jewelry in my stretched tongue. It's just a giant hole. Kind of looks the way I feel like you would imagine it would look. It's a giant hole. Now, another cool element of this for me was I was a fine arts major, and I started college while I was in high school, and as part of that, you take all sorts of different art courses. So I did take some sculpture and ceramic courses, and in that, I started learning more about Moche culture, which is an indigenous culture from Peru. Now, Moche culture practiced tongue piercing and tongue stretching as part of religious rituals and rites, and we know this from documentation on their pottery at the time, and from historical record. And now, I am biracial on my father's side. I am Spanish, Brazilian, and Peruvian, and I've been starting to do more ancestry work and digging, and trying to reach out to more family members, and it looks like we can track some of our Peruvian ancestry to Moche culture. So for me, there was this like amazing experience when I was in college learning about this and learning about this history, which was also congruent with the time that I was starting to learn more about my father's side of the family, starting to try and do research and figure out more about who I came from, who my family was, because I didn't have any contact with my dad's side, and it felt like this magical alignment that I had been so like immediately and electrically drawn to, of all things, tongue stretching at such a young age. I mean, again, remember, I stretched my tongue before I even stretched my ears. To find out that it was a part of this culture around the same time I was finding out that my father's side was also a part of that same culture. It felt very fated. And my stretched tongue became an incredibly important modification to me, not only for its beauty, not only for what the stretching journey and process for that piercing taught me and gave me, but also for the way it allowed me to connect with my father's side of my family, connect with my culture and my history, and inspired me to start doing more work to trace my family lineage back and find out more about where I came from. It felt like too much of a coincidence for me to be drawn of all things to a stretched tongue, only to later find out that significance and find out my own family history. So this is a modification that was very precious to me. And you may be thinking, well, Lynn, you mentioned at the beginning of the video that you used to have your tongue stretched, and you're talking about how special and precious it was to you, so what is the deal? And kind of part of why I wanted to make this video is because I think it's a really good lesson for folks that everything in life, but especially body modification, serves us until it doesn't. And it is allowed to be a part of our life that does not last forever, just like anything else. In 2019, as many of you may know, I left my final apprenticeship, which was a very abusive, very not great apprenticeship. And I do have a video up on my channel about my apprenticeship story if you're interested in learning about that. But very shortly after leaving Florida, I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder as a direct result of abuse that I experienced in my apprenticeships and also domestic violence that I experienced in my apprenticeships. And CPTSD is not easy to live with at all. And a big element of my CPTSD was and has been night terrors. I get very vivid, very extreme night terrors most nights of the week. And due to these night terrors, I was grinding my teeth very, very badly at night. Not only that, but due to an injury that I suffered in one of my apprenticeships, I also have pretty bad TMJ, which is a problem with the muscles of my jaw, and it makes it really hard for me to open my mouth sometimes. And I tried a lot of different things. I tried treatments for the TMJ, muscle relaxants, different medications. I tried night guards for the grinding, and I was literally grinding through like very expensive night guards in a month or two. And there came a point where, because of these night terrors and the grinding, I was grinding my tongue plug at night as well. And up until this point, I had actually had no oral damage from my tongue piercing or my stretched tongue piercing. I had seen a piercer who placed it very thoughtfully with the intention for stretching, so it was placed further back so it did not touch my teeth or gums, and it was placed at such an angle where it wasn't going to rub against my bottom teeth. I understood the risks, so I was really responsible with it. I didn't rub it along my teeth or gums. I didn't play with it. Until I started having the night terrors and I started grinding. And while there are some treatment options for PTSD and night terrors, a lot of them are not great. And I explored a lot of different medications and a lot of different options before ultimately making the call with my dental and medical professionals to retire my stretched tongue piercing. As much as I love it, and as incredibly important as it was to me, and as incredibly significant as it was and is to me, I didn't want to take the risk of losing my teeth or permanently damaging my teeth where it would affect my function to eat and chew and speak over a body piercing, no matter how much I loved it, and no matter how important it was to me, and no matter how significant it was to me. And it taught me some really important lessons, because my stretched tongue piercing is still just as important and just as significant and just as special to me as it was when I wore it. It hasn't lost any sense of importance by the fact that I opted to remove it. In fact, it's taught me incredibly important lessons about patience, about resilience, about letting go, and about honoring my body's needs as they change and grow with me. As many of you know, I moved to Philadelphia and I'm currently on hiatus from piercing. Part of that is while I'm undergoing medical treatment for my CPTSD, which has been incredibly beneficial. And it has been helping with the night terrors and the grinding. It's still not 100%, and my medical professionals don't think it ever will be, but there has been a light at the end of the tunnel where that has gotten a little bit better. It still hasn't gotten better enough where I think it will ever be safe for me to have any piercings in my tongue again, which does suck, you know, I won't lie. It is disappointing because I'm a huge fan of tongue piercings. I love doing them. I loved wearing them. But at the end of the day, my teeth and my gums and my oral health come first. And I say it all the time on my channel, and hopefully this video shows you how much I actually believe these words, but there is no piercing that is cuter than having all of your teeth in your mouth. And no piercing, I think, that is more important than having all of your teeth in your mouth. That being said, what I did do was I did choose last year to have my tongue split. Here's a photo of me right after getting it done. This is the first time I have publicly admitted to having had my tongue split because there's some interesting stuff about talking about heavy body modification online that needs to be considered, but I now live in a state where it's a little bit easier for me to discuss those things. And now this is actually the first time I am admitting to having my tongue split online, so to everyone who's been speculating on my TikTok and on my Instagram, you now have your answer. There's a lot that goes into talking about heavy body modification on the internet, and I am currently attempting to figure out if there is a way for me to safely and ethically do so, and I think I'm pretty close to figuring that out, so I may make a video about that in the future. But for me, that was a way to still do something enjoyable with my tongue piercing and have modifications that I enjoyed and that felt right for me, especially since I could no longer wear my stretched tongue piercing or honestly any tongue piercing safely. This is the story of my tongue stretching journey, and what a cool and wild ride it is. If you want to see me make a video that's instructional about how to stretch your tongue, if there's interest in that, if there's other people out there who want to stretch their tongues, let me know in the comments down below because I would love to talk about it. I'd love to share the information and the knowledge and the mistakes that I made stretching my tongue to try and help others avoid those same things. So if there's interest in that, let me know in the comments down below. And as per usual, if you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe, and I am sure we will hang out again soon and talk about more cool stuff. Bye!